the Russians are also very angry with President Macron over his stance on Ukraine. He said that Western troops may have to go in on the ground in Ukraine. He's very supportive of Ukraine's struggle against Vladimir Putin's invasion. So all of this put together certainly gives the Russians a very strong motive. Whether that adds up to a Russian hand being behind these attacks, we're still not sure.
Day two of this, David, what's going on now? What's the picture?
Well, SNCF, that's the French national rail operator, has told us this morning that their workers have been out all night under the rain trying to repair those fiber optics cables and signal boxes that were damaged yesterday. Explosive devices set them on fire. And they say that they're having some success. So there's still going to be disruption through the weekend, as you were saying. But in domestic French terms, the situation is coming pretty well, not back to normal, but it's improving massively. Yesterday, we had 2/3 of services cancelled in France. Today, up to 70 or 80% of trains will be maintained, but we are being warned that there'll be delays of 1, 2, or even 3 hours. Now, in terms of Eurostar, we had a quarter of trains cancelled yesterday. That's going to go down today, according to Eurostar, but there are still likely to be delays because Eurostar trains from between London and Paris are still being forced to use lower speed tracks rather than the high speed lines that they generally run on. So that means delays of at least 90 minutes.
Is this in any way better? Not that it would be better for French people more generally because it's the weekend, but of course with Paris, there's so many people who want to get there and get out of there because of the opening ceremony, because of the fact the Olympics have just started, David.
Well, I think it's a perfect nightmare for the French, really, because not only have you got the people coming in for the Olympics, but this is also a weekend when a lot of French people who've been on holiday in July are returning to Paris, and others are trying to leave Paris, generally to head south, but some west and some to other places in the north. So you've just got huge numbers of people wanting to travel. And so there's going to be gridlock on the roads. The latest traffic forecasts look absolutely abysmal. A lot of holidaymakers returning or leaving are going to be stuck in miles of jams on the motorways and the other roads. Plus, you've got the disruption on the rail network, plus the Olympics. It's a perfect storm.
What do we know about who is behind the attacks? Is there any worry that they could strike again? I've heard all sorts of theories, the Russians, the Iranians, and perhaps even farmers who would have, of course, caused a lot of disruption in France previously, but perhaps not on this scale.
Yeah, that's right. Personally, I think the farmer theory is probably a little bit far-fetched. Initially, suspicion fell on the Russians. Why? Because the Russians do have a history of alleged arson attacks across Europe. A Russian chef was arrested in Paris on Tuesday, and he's accused of involvement in a plot to disrupt the Olympics. We know it wasn't a terrorist attack that was being planned, but we haven't been given very many details of exactly what the plot was. So I think the Russians are still in the frame. But yesterday, French security officials were pointing out that the modus operandi of these attacks seemed to resemble that used by, as they call them, ultra-leftists, who do have a history of attacks on rail lines in France. So between all of that, it's really hard to say. No arrests have been made. There's been no claim of responsibility. The Israelis have pointed the finger at the Iranians, but as far as I know, there hasn't been any confirmation or support for that theory from anyone else. So for the time being, we're pretty much in the dark.
The Russian national team, though, of course, is banned from the Olympics. I know that individual athletes can compete as individual competitors, but really there is some credence to that theory, certainly, that the Russians are not for the Olympics anyway. So the timing of this might, I suppose, David, bleed into that a little bit.
Yeah, there's that. The Russians are also very angry with President Macron over his stance on Ukraine. He said that Western troops may have to go in on the ground in Ukraine. He's very supportive of Ukraine's struggle against Vladimir Putin's invasion. So, all of this put together certainly gives the Russians a very strong motive. Whether that adds up to a Russian hand being behind these attacks, we're still not sure. Um, but according to French officials, the Russians have been behind a campaign of disruption in France over the past few months, which has included graffiti, Stars of David after the attack in southern Israel on the 7th of October and the Israeli military action in Gaza, um, and also red hands daubed on the Holocaust Memorial in Paris. So it would be part of a pattern if it's
Yes.
the Russians, but we don't have official confirmation.
Okay. David Chazan there in Paris, a reporter for The Times. Thank you for that analysis.